The upscale restaurant buzzed with evening diners as a young waitress approached a VIP table, carrying a tray of drinks with steady hands. At the table sat a notorious billionaire, his cold eyes fixed on her with obvious disdain. "What kind of service is this?" he snapped harshly. She bit her lip, fighting back tears as she set down his glass. The entire dining room tensed with awkwardness, unaware that this cruel man was her long-lost brother. Emma Carter, 24, smoothed her black uniform and checked her reflection in the staff mirror before beginning another long shift at Meridian, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. Her long brown hair was pulled back in a regulation ponytail, and despite her exhaustion from working double shifts, she maintained the professional smile required of all servers. The other staff barely acknowledged her existence. To them, Emma was just another small-town girl trying to make it in the big city, someone who'd probably be gone within a month when the reality of fine dining service overwhelmed her. What they didn't know was that Emma desperately needed this job. Every paycheck went towards supporting her 15-year-old sister Lucy, who was living with Emma in a tiny apartment while finishing high school. Emma had been Lucy's guardian since their grandmother died 2 years ago, and she was determined to give her sister opportunities she'd never had. The hardest part wasn't the long hours or demanding customers. It was the constant reminder of what she'd lost. 20 years ago, when Emma was 4 and her brother Alex was 12, their parents had died in a car accident. The siblings had been separated by the foster care system, with Alex going to one family and Emma to another. Despite years of searching and hoping, Emma had never found any trace of her older brother. The only connection she had to that lost time was a small wooden bracelet their father had carved, splitting it into 2 pieces, one for each child. Emma had kept her half all these years, carrying it in her apron pocket like a talisman, whispering prayers to a brother she wasn't even sure was still alive. Tonight, Meridian was hosting one of its most challenging customers, Alexander Hayes, 36, whose billion-dollar real estate empire had made him one of the city's most powerful and feared businessmen. The staff dreaded his visits because nothing ever met his impossibly high standards. When Emma was assigned to his table, the other servers exchanged sympathetic glances. "Good luck," whispered Maria, the head waitress. "He made our last server cry within 10 minutes. Emma approached table 12 with professional composure, but inside her heart was racing. She'd heard stories about Alexander Hayes, how he'd built his fortune through ruthless business deals, how he'd never shown mercy to competitors, how he treated service staff like they were invisible. "Good evening, Mr. Hayes," Emma said politely, setting down his water glass with a steady hand. "Can I start you with anything from our wine selection?" Alexander looked up with the cold, calculating stare that had intimidated countless business rivals. "This water isn't cold enough," he said flatly. "Replace it immediately." Emma felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as nearby diners turned to watch the exchange, but she simply nodded. "Of course, sir." Right away. Over the following weeks, Alexander Hayes became a regular fixture at Meridian, always requesting Emma's section, always finding fault with something. He changed his order multiple times, complained about the temperature of every dish, and seemed to take pleasure in watching Emma maintain her composure under pressure. "Why do you think he keeps coming back?" asked David, the restaurant manager, watching Alexander berate Emma over the placement of his silverware. "Maybe he enjoys the power trip," Maria replied with disgust. "Some rich people get off on making working people miserable." But Emma noticed something others didn't. Despite his harsh words and impossible demands, Alexander always left generous tips, not just the standard 20%, but 50, sometimes 60%. And sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, she caught him watching her with an expression that wasn't cruel or calculating, but something closer to curiosity. The breakthrough came on a particularly difficult evening when Emma was working her second double shift of the week. Lucy had been sick, missing school, and Emma was worried about falling behind on rent. She was exhausted. Her hands were shaking from too much caffeine and too little sleep. And when she accidentally spilled a drop of wine while pouring Alexander's glass, she braced herself for his inevitable explosion. Instead, he looked at her closely for the first time. "You look tired," he said, and his voice held none of its usual edge. "I'm fine, sir," Emma replied automatically, but her voice cracked slightly. "When was the last time you took a break?" The unexpected concern in his question caught Emma off guard. It's been a busy week. After her shift that night, Emma was surprised to find Alexander waiting by the staff exit. For a moment, she was frightened. His reputation preceded him, and she couldn't imagine why he'd want to speak with her privately. "You mentioned you have a sister," he said without preamble. "Yes, sir. Lucy. She's 15. Parents? They died when I was very young," Emma replied carefully. "It's just been Lucy and me for a while now." Something flickered across Alexander's face. Pain, recognition, she couldn't tell. "Any other family? Siblings?" Emma's hand unconsciously moved to her apron pocket, where she kept the wooden bracelet piece. "I had a brother once, but we were separated when our parents died. I haven't seen him in 20 years. Alexander went very still. "What was his name?" "Alex," Emma whispered, surprised by how much it still hurt to say his name aloud. "Alex Carter. He would be 36 now, if he's still alive." The color drained from Alexander's face. He stared at Emma as if seeing her for the first time, taking in her features with new recognition. The brown eyes, the stubborn set of her chin, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. All mannerisms he remembered from a 4-year-old sister he'd been forced to leave behind. "The bracelet," he said hoarsely. "Do you still have the wooden bracelet Dad made?" Emma's world tilted. She pulled the small piece of carved wood from her pocket with trembling hands, staring at the jagged edge where it had been broken in half. Alexander reached into his wallet and withdrew an identical piece, its broken edge matching Emma's perfectly. "Emma," he whispered, and his voice broke on her name. "My little sister, Emma." For 20 years, Alexander had convinced himself that his sister was better off without him, that the angry, bitter man he'd become would only bring pain to anyone who tried to love him. But seeing her now, kind, hard-working, still carrying their father's gift after all these years, he realized how wrong he'd been. "I looked for you," Emma said through her tears. "I never stopped looking." "I'm sorry," Alexander replied, and for the first time in decades, he meant it completely. News of the reunion spread through the restaurant industry like wildfire. Billionaire Alexander Hayes reunites with long-lost sister dominated headlines for weeks, with journalists digging into their tragic childhood and separation, their different paths in life, and the miraculous coincidence that brought them back together. The reaction was mixed and often cruel. Business rivals saw Alexander's newfound vulnerability as weakness, while social media was filled with speculation about Emma's motives. "She's obviously after his money," read one comment thread that went viral. "Who believes in coincidences like this? She probably researched him and got that job specifically to get close to him. A billionaire with a waitress sister? This is either the greatest scam ever or the most pathetic publicity stunt," wrote a prominent business blogger. The scrutiny was intense and painful, but what hurt Emma most was watching how it affected Alexander. The brother she'd rediscovered was nothing like the cold, ruthless businessman the media portrayed. In private, he was gentle, protective, and desperately trying to rebuild a relationship he thought he'd lost forever. "Maybe this was a mistake," Emma told him one evening as they sat in his penthouse apartment. Lucy curled up on the couch between them, watching a movie. "I don't want to damage your reputation or your business." "Let them talk," Alexander said firmly. "I spent 20 years building walls to keep people out because I was afraid of losing anyone else I cared about. I'm not losing you again because of what strangers think." The real confrontation came at Meridian itself during the restaurant's annual investor dinner. Richard Morrison, the restaurant's primary investor and a longtime business rival of Alexander's, had been looking for an opportunity to humiliate him publicly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard announced during his speech, his voice carrying clearly through the packed dining room, "I think we should address the elephant in the room. Our esteemed patron, Mr. Hayes, has been making quite a spectacle of himself lately, claiming that one of our servers is his long-lost sister." Emma, who was working the event, felt every eye in the room turned toward her. Alexander started to stand, his face dark with anger, but Richard continued. "Now, I'm not saying this young woman is necessarily a fraud," Richard said with a cruel smile. "But what are the odds? A billionaire just happens to discover his sister working as a waitress in his favorite restaurant? It's quite convenient, wouldn't you say? The dining room buzzed with uncomfortable murmurs. Emma felt her cheeks burning with shame. But before she could retreat to the kitchen, Alexander was on his feet. "You want to question my family?" Alexander's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "You want to suggest that my sister is somehow deceiving me?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out both pieces of the wooden bracelet, holding them up for everyone to see. "This was carved by our father when Emma was 2 years old. We each kept half when we were separated by the foster system after our parents died." The room fell silent as Alexander fitted the two pieces together, showing how perfectly they matched. "Emma Carter has worked at this restaurant for months, long before either of us knew who the other was," Alexander continued, his voice growing stronger. "She's been supporting her younger sister, working double shifts, never asking for anything from anyone. She doesn't need my money. She's been surviving just fine on her own strength and dignity." He turned to face Richard directly. "But you know what? Even if she was after my money, even if this was all some elaborate scheme, she'd still be worth 10 of you. Because in the months I've known her, she's shown more kindness to strangers, more grace under pressure, and more genuine character than I've seen in 20 years of dealing with people like you." Emma stepped forward, her hand finding Alexander's. "I don't need anyone to believe our story," she said clearly, addressing the room with quiet dignity. "I have my brother back. I have my family. That's worth more than any opinion or any amount of money." The elderly woman at table 6, Mrs. Hartford, whose family had owned the restaurant before selling it, stood up slowly and began applauding. Others joined her until the entire dining room was on its feet. Richard found himself standing alone, his cruel smile fading as he realized he'd miscalculated badly. "Family isn't about DNA tests or proof," Mrs. Hartford said in a voice that carried clearly through the room. "It's about love, loyalty, and the courage to hold on to hope even when everything seems lost." The weeks following the public revelation brought profound changes to all their lives. Alexander immediately moved Emma and Lucy into a guest house on his estate, insisting they needed proper security given the media attention, but more importantly, wanting to make up for 20 years of lost time. Emma was overwhelmed by the luxury, but insisted on maintaining her independence. "I appreciate everything you want to do for us," she told Alexander, "but I need to feel like I'm contributing, not just being taken care of." Understanding her need for purpose, Alexander offered Emma a position overseeing the charitable foundation he decided to establish. The Hayes Family Foundation would focus on preventing family separation and supporting children aging out of foster care, causes that were deeply personal to both siblings. "Who better to run this than someone who lived through the system and came out stronger?" Alexander asked. Lucy, meanwhile, blossomed under the stability and opportunities her new circumstances provided. She excelled in her accelerated classes and talked excitedly about college plans that had seemed impossible just months before. "I can't believe I have a billionaire uncle," Lucy said one evening at dinner, causing both Emma and Alexander to laugh. "I can't believe I have a family again," Alexander replied quietly. The changes weren't just practical. They were emotional. Alexander, who had spent decades building walls around his heart, was learning to let people in again. Emma watched him transform from the cold, demanding customer she'd first met into a protective older brother who worried about her working too hard and made sure Lucy had everything she needed for school. "You know what's funny?" Emma told him one night as they sat on his terrace watching the city lights. "I used to wonder what my life would have been like if we'd never been separated. But now I think everything happened the way it was supposed to. We both needed to become who we are before we could find each other again." Alexander nodded, fingering the wooden bracelet piece he now wore on a chain around his neck. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I needed to learn what it felt like to have everything money could buy, but nothing that actually mattered." 6 months after their reunion, Emma stood in the office of the Hayes Family Foundation, looking at photos of the first group of siblings they'd successfully kept together through their emergency housing program. Lucy's artwork hung on the walls, bright, hopeful paintings that captured the joy of family reunification. "We're making a difference," Emma told Alexander as he joined her. "We're making sure no other brother and sister have to wait 20 years to find each other again," he replied, pulling both Emma and Lucy into a group hug. For the first time in decades, Alexander Hayes felt truly rich. 1 year later, at the Hayes Family Foundation's first annual gala, Alexander stood at the podium with Emma and Lucy beside him. The ballroom was filled with families they'd helped, donors who'd supported their mission, and media covering their success story. "A year ago, I thought I was a successful man because I had money and power," Alexander said, his voice steady with emotion. "But I was wrong. Success is standing here with my sister, who taught me that kindness is stronger than cruelty, and that family never truly disappears. It just waits for the right moment to come home." Emma squeezed his hand as the audience erupted in applause. Love transcends time, circumstance, and even our own mistakes. And sometimes the family we've lost is closer than we ever dared to hope.